I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming you all to this keynote session featuring Andrea Goldsmith, who is Princeton's new Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. For those of you who I'm connecting with for the first time, my name is Naveen Verma, and I am a professor of electrical engineering here at Princeton, and also the director of Princeton's Keller Center for Innovation in Engineering Education. We all really have the wonderful opportunity today to hear from Dean Goldsmith about her personal journey in innovation, bringing academia and industry together. 5 years ago, the Princeton Entrepreneurship Advisory Committee released an important report titled Entrepreneurship, the Princeton Way, which launched what was then a new phase in the university's expanding commitment to and focus on entrepreneurship and innovation. Now, central to this commitment is Princeton recognizing innovation broadly as the initiation of transformations through risk-taking actions and value-creating organizations, not only by the founding of startups, but also by creating nonprofits, joining early-stage companies, and innovating within large corporations, governments, and non-governmental organizations. Taking actions to make significant positive changes by way of a daily process that pushes, pivots, and persists. In fully embracing this vision and this commitment, we in the Princeton innovation community are thrilled to welcome Dean Goldsmith, a dynamic national leader who is not only an academic star, but also a highly successful entrepreneur. Today, we have the rare treat of hearing about her personal journey in both roles. In fact, as you will quite likely see for yourselves, the characteristic that Dean Goldsmith exemplifies for me is how the impacts of both real-world innovation and academic scholarship are not just amplified, but frankly driven to completely new places when these two are brought together. After her remarks, we'll take questions from the audience. Please use the polls function in your web browser at any time to submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many of these as we can. Now, by way of formal introduction, Dean Andrea J. Goldsmith is the Dean of Engineering and Applied Sciences and the Arthur LeGrand Dottie Professor of Electrical Engineering at Princeton University. She was previously the Stephen Harris Professor of Engineering and Professor of Electrical Engineering at Stanford University, where she is now Harris Professor Emerita. Her research interests are in information theory, communication theory, and signal processing, and their applications to wireless communications, interconnected systems, and neuroscience. She founded and served as Chief Technical Officer of Plume Wi-Fi, formerly Accelera Incorporated, and of Quantena Incorporated. And she currently serves on the board of directors for Medtronic and Crown Castle Incorporated. She's also the founding chair of the IEEE Board of Directors Committee on Diversity, Inclusion, and Ethics, and chairs of several committees in the National Academy of Engineering. Dean Goldsmith is a member of the National Academy of Engineering and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a fellow of the IEEE and of Stanford, and has received several awards for her work, including the Marconi Prize, the IEEE Sumner Technical Field Award, and the Silicon Valley San Jose Business Journal's Women of Influence Award. She's author of the book Wireless Communications and co-author of the books MIMO Wireless Communications and Principles of Cognitive Radio, all published by Cambridge University Press. She's also an inventor on 29 patents. She received the BS, MS, and PhD degrees in electrical engineering from UC Berkeley. Now, thank you for joining us today, Dean Goldsmith. And without any further delay, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Naveen, so much for that beautiful, warm, and detailed welcome. I am almost speechless at such a wonderful set of remarks, but I can't be speechless because I'm about to give a speech. So it's really a pleasure to be the keynote speaker at this event. In particular, because I am so excited to be part of Princeton and part of the the innovation ecosystem that is coming about and that I am helping to drive along with my partners, Naveen as head of the Keller Center, and also Rod Priestley as our inaugural Vice Dean for Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Innovation. So let me go, go into slideshow mode, and there's a little bit of a delay. There we go. All right, so this is indeed a talk about my personal journey, but I'm also going to, of course, talk a little bit about my vision for Princeton. And Naveen gave a little bit away in terms of my personal journey, at least the very, some of the educational and other aspects. I'm actually going to go all the way back to the beginning when I talk about my personal journey, which is how I came to view engineering as the intersection of creativity and more traditional engineering analytical approaches. So my mom was a cartoonist for the Bullwinkle and Rocky show. In fact, she was a character designer. And you can see that there's a strong resemblance between my mom and Natasha Fattal. My dad was a mechanical engineering professor at Berkeley for his whole career. And so I like to think that I embody the best of my two parents as an engineer in terms of bringing a creative and artistic approach to the problems that I solve, as well as the methodologies and rigorous tools that I learned as an engineer. As Naveen mentioned, I got my undergraduate degree at UC Berkeley, where I studied all kinds of things in addition to engineering, particularly political science and languages and philosophy. And so even though Berkeley wasn't a liberal arts university, I got a very broad liberal arts education. And that really helped to make me a better engineer in terms of having a better understanding of the impact of the technologies that I was creating. And it also made me a better leader in terms of understanding much broader aspects of engineering beyond just the technological aspects. Now, when I got my undergraduate degree in 1986, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was intrigued by developing technology, so I joined a Silicon Valley startup in 1986. So that was my first job right out of college. This is Silicon Valley in 1986, so it's not what you envision today. This picture was taken right outside of Maxim Technology offices, which was right off 101. Now, if you go there, it's surrounded by tall buildings, but there was only empty fields behind their office. And that's where I actually started working on antenna array systems and really fell in love with wireless communication. It was not a booming time in Silicon Valley. This was during the defense community's shutdown, or not shutdown, but shrinkage. There weren't a lot of exciting startups. There was no wireless communication in commercial domains because the cell phone first systems had just started to roll out. But I was really in love with the technology, and I was working with a lot of PhDs who had different ways of thinking about problems than I did. And so it was really working at Maxim that made me decide that I wanted to go back and further my education and learn more so that I could develop these systems with the knowledge that these PhDs had, and also their very broad approach to problems. So I went back to Berkeley for my PhD starting in 1989. I spent several summers at AT&T Bell Laboratories in Crawford Hill, right down the street from Princeton. So this isn't my first foray into central New Jersey. And Bell Labs at the time was really a hotbed of brilliant engineers, brilliant visionaries, and I became even more enamored of wireless communications and wireless research. When I finished my PhD, I joined the faculty at Caltech, and I was there for 5 years until I moved to Stanford in 1999, and stayed there until Princeton lured me away just September 1st to become its Dean of Engineering and Applied Science. So I've been at 4 very different universities, and I'm excited to bring that experience to Princeton in terms of fostering more innovation, entrepreneurship, and industry partners, because that made a big difference in my career, as I'll talk about a little bit later. As Naveen mentioned, I founded 2 wireless companies, Quantena Communication, which went public in 2016, and Plume Wi-Fi, and I'll talk a little bit more about my entrepreneurial journey as well. And I serve on the corporate boards of 2 companies, Crown Castle, which is a cell phone tower company, and Medtronic, which is the largest biotechnology medical device company in the world. I've learned a lot about technology and about leadership serving on these boards, and they've been a tremendous opportunity for me in terms of having a broader perspective on technology and how it can impact companies as well as people in terms of healthcare and cellular technology. As Naveen mentioned, I spend a lot of time working on diversity in engineering, particularly in the IEEE. I chair a committee there on diversity and inclusion. And my best results are my 2 kids, Daniel, who got his master's degree in electrical engineering earlier this year, and my daughter, Nicole, who's a senior in mechanical engineering. So my husband is also an electrical engineer, so I'm surrounded by engineers. Sometimes I say I'm not quite sure what I did wrong, but I'm very proud of my 2 kids, and I see the future of engineering is in great hands with the next generation. So my research is in wireless communication. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but I will say that I have worked in wireless communication since the early 80s, my first job, mid 80s. And I believe that now is actually the most exciting time since then in terms of not only building out the next generation of wireless 5G communication, but also the systems that they're going to enable far beyond our cell phones and our laptops and our iPads. We're really going to transform the way we work, live, and play through these innovations in wireless, where basically every device that has an on-off switch can be connected to the internet. That will allow us to extract tremendous amounts of data, which we can use to make our infrastructures stronger and more efficient. It can transform healthcare. It can transform cities. And so I'm very excited about the future of wireless communication. I could talk about that for the rest of the time, but this talk is really about my journey as an entrepreneur. So let me move to that. You might ask, why would I, in 2005, found my first startup, which was Quantena. So you say, why did I start Quantena?
I want to be a billionaire so freaking bad.
So many people think that the reason you start a company is to make a lot of money. And that's not why I started Quantena. But of course, money and making money is one of the currencies of success in a startup. So if you do a startup to make money and that's your only motivation, you're likely to fail because most startups fail. So if your only motivation is to make money, then you're not going to benefit from all the other amazing experiences that you get in starting a company. So of course you have to think about making money when you're starting a company, or else you're not going to have the right road to success. But you should also think more broadly about why you would want to start a company beyond just making money. The main reason why I started Quantena was to build something again. So if you remember that picture of me in 1986 in the fields off Highway 101 in Silicon Valley, that was the last time I had built something before I started Quantena. My research is really in the theory of wireless communication. And so after 20 years of developing lots of theory around how do we get very robust and high-speed wireless communication, I wanted to see if that theory mattered in actually building a product. If we could use the theory that I developed to build the best Wi-Fi chipset, and that's what we were building at Quantena. So really, the main motivation I had to start Quantena was to build state-of-the-art products grounded in the theory that I developed over the previous 20 years and see if it mattered in practice. And then in the process of doing that, which we did develop actually the world's leading performance Wi-Fi based on the theory that I developed. But in addition, as we were building those products, I saw ways of new research areas and new ways of building products that actually helped to inform my research and teaching when I returned to Stanford as a regular faculty member. So the thing that I'm convinced of based on my own experience as an entrepreneur is that when you go and start a company as a professor, all of the experience that you get in taking your research ideas and turning them into products and technology really enhances your research and your teaching. The way I would teach students after Quantena was very different from how I taught them before, because I had this very rich experience of taking these deep technical ideas and turning them into products. So I really brought back so much from my startup experience. It made me a better academic. And of course, one of the reasons that I wanted to start Quantena was to see if I could build a successful company. And we did. So this picture from March 2006 is when we got our first Series A funding term sheet. This is in the offices of Sequoia Capital off Sand Hill Road. And 10 years later, on October 2016, I was able to ring the bell of the NASDAQ along with my co-founder and several of the leadership in the company, as well as the very early engineers who started along with me way back in 2006 that I had brought in to help found the company. So this is me. I look pretty happy. It was a very happy day. And again, I wouldn't say that that was the highlight of my career, but it was certainly a wonderful day to celebrate all of the accomplishments from that term sheet that we'd signed 10 years before, all the technology that went into it, and all the hard work of all the engineers and the leaders to make it a successful company. So what did I learn from this journey? So first, startups are a wild ride. They're not for the faint of heart. So you see that picture of me ringing the bell on the NASDAQ, and I'm pretty happy. There were a lot of unhappy days at Quantena as well. Days when we were about to run out of money, days when there was tensions between the co-founders or with the executive team, or with the investors or with the customers. Many, many challenging days. So the notion that, you know, startups are a bed of roses with a bottle of champagne at the end is really not true of the large majority of startups. And that's why doing a startup is not for everybody. You really have to be prepared for the ups and downs of the ride that is taking a company from the very beginning to the successful exit, whether it's a sale or a public offering. The other thing I learned is that academics have amazingly good jobs. I certainly appreciated the freedom that I had as an academic far more after doing Quantena, where I was beholden to investors and customers and co-founders and other leaders. And, you know, really, I sit here today after founding 2 companies and say my heart is still in academia. Research and teaching is such a joyous way to spend your profession. And so we really have wonderful jobs as academics. And if you do a startup, you will find that it's even more wonderful than you thought before you went out on that journey. The other thing that was incredibly valuable and rewarding to learn is that theory matters in practice, that this 20 years of writing papers on the theory of wireless communication allowed Quantena to build technology that was better than anybody else. And that was very rewarding, especially when I returned to doing my basic research, which is in theory. The other interesting thing is if you think about chip design, that decades of research goes into the most sophisticated Wi-Fi chipset today, and yet it only costs about $5. So, you know, the value of technology is in scale, especially when it comes to VLSI chipsets, and most successful companies need to sell at scale. So the theory matters, but you have to apply that theory in a way that it can have a lot of impact by scaling and impacting a lot of people and a lot of partners. And finally, I learned that Silicon Valley is not friendly to diverse entrepreneurs. So I've started 2 companies. I've done lots of funding pitches up and down Sand Hill Road. And in almost all of them, the only other women in the room besides me were serving the coffee. So it was a very unusual experience, even though as a woman academic in engineering, there's not so many women, there's far fewer in Silicon Valley. And certainly there's been a lot written about why Silicon Valley is not a friendly place for diverse engineers, whether it's in large companies or medium-sized companies or startups. So one of the books that I read right before starting my next startup, and I almost never recommend books on startups, and when I do, this is the only one I recommend. And the reason is because it has you ask fundamental questions that I think are essential to ask before you go down the journey of doing a startup. And the premise of this book, even if you don't read the book, is that when, as a new entrepreneur, you're faced with a set of questions like, should I found a company? Should I do it alone? When should I bring in investors? When should I bring in more employees? You don't know, as a new engineer, the implications of those decisions until much later. And so at every fork in the road, as you're faced with these decisions, you just need to understand that the ramifications of those decisions are something that you can't know. And I certainly didn't know that as a first-time entrepreneur. I knew it as a second-time entrepreneur. I like to believe that that meant I made better decisions the second time around. Certainly, I didn't make the same mistakes the second time around as I made the first time around, but I still made a lot of mistakes. So there's an infinite number of mistakes that you can make as an entrepreneur. And therefore, even if you know that in asking yourself these questions, you may not know the right answer, it's very helpful to know that the ramifications can be significant, and you may not know those ramifications for months or even years. So I'm going to close with the last few minutes talking about my vision for Princeton engineering, and then I'll come to entrepreneurship here. So the reason that I found taking this role so exciting is that Princeton has grand plans to grow engineering, to grow the faculty by 50%, and then along with it to grow the graduate student and postdoc population. And the reason it's important for Princeton engineering to grow is that that is how it's going to maximize its impact. Princeton is a very, very strong engineering school today. I believe by far the strongest of all of the Ivy League schools. And I don't intend to have Princeton engineering compete with Stanford or MIT or Berkeley. I intend to craft a Princeton engineering school that is elite in its own image, not competing with anybody else, because I believe that having engineering grow within a liberal arts institution will allow Princeton engineering to have a broader perspective on the technology that it develops and on the applications of that technology. That was certainly true for me as an engineer with a broad liberal arts background. I think it made me a better engineer. And I think Princeton engineering can truly forge a unique path along its informal model to significantly benefit humanity by having the strong liberal arts that surrounds a strong Princeton engineering school. I'm also excited about the interdisciplinary initiatives that we're planning to launch. We have a bioengineering symposium in a few weeks, and we're doing some major initiatives in data science as well. I believe that those two, data science and bioengineering, are really in their infancy and will have so much impact on the world. Those two areas look to me like information technology looked in the 1950s when Terman was just starting to build up Stanford's engineering school. In addition, we have just launched a very exciting initiative in quantum computing, which can transform the way we do computations, as well as in robotics and smart cities. And these are areas that are so important and so exciting and so interdisciplinary. And they have, again, the impact, the potential to significantly impact people. We're building a new neighborhood for the School of Engineering, which is going to bring it closer not only to the sciences, but to all of Princeton, to the humanities, to the social sciences, and having a new neighborhood that can serve as a catalyst for collaborations across engineering and across all of Princeton will really be transformative for the school. I've already talked about my work to enhance diversity and inclusion. The reason that, in my experience, it's important to foster diversity and inclusion in engineering is because it leads to better outcomes. In my companies, in my universities, in all my organizations that I've been a part of, having diverse ideas around the table leads to better outcomes. And that's certainly true in engineering, because if you don't have those diverse perspectives and points of view, you miss a lot of the dark side of technology because you're not thinking about it broadly. So to all the diverse engineers out there, the profession needs you, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that we at Princeton foster a diverse community of engineers and also make sure that they can maximize their success by being at Princeton. And finally, the purpose of this keynote is to talk about fostering innovation, entrepreneurship, and industry partnerships within engineering and across Princeton. That's something I'm very excited to do as well, because again, in my experience, that is how we can actually increase the impact of Princeton engineering. So this vision, all the things that I just said, I hope to not only significantly impact Princeton in a positive way, but also other universities in the area and around the country and around the world, as well as the engineering profession and the high-tech industry. So Naveen alluded to the fact that entrepreneurship is broadly defined. I agree with that. It isn't just about starting companies, but it's also about forging new paths and taking risks, not only in commercial companies, but in social endeavors and in any organization. And to increase Princeton's impact, we need to take our ideas out of academia. So my view for Princeton is to foster a diverse and inclusive tech hub in the tri-state area. I view Princeton as being the perfect place and time to do that now. It has all the ingredients in terms of having outstanding faculty and students, not only at Princeton, but throughout the area. There's a huge demand from industry, particularly in New York and Philadelphia. There's government support. New Jersey would love to see a much stronger high-tech hub in the New Jersey state. There's plenty of capital, and New Jersey is a great place to live with lots of cheap land, which is important when you're trying to build companies as well as attract people as a place to live. And it's easy to access given the large airports in Philadelphia and Newark. We have many impactful programs in entrepreneurship, but we're growing them. And this is part of the purpose of this Engage 2020 is to showcase our programs, bring people together, and really push the needle hard, step on the gas hard to increase entrepreneurship and innovation at Princeton and beyond Princeton. So with that, let's see. I'm excited to build this tech hub, and I think it really fits perfectly within Princeton mission to benefit the country and all of humanity. So with that, I'll wrap up and very excited to take your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Dean Goldsmith, for that really important mix, I think, of the personal aspect of innovation and also, sort of the impact and how you think about the impact that you can have broadly. We do have a bunch of questions that are coming in, which I'm very glad to see. Just as we start to collate these, let me ask the following one. An important group that you're speaking to, I believe, is the students who are aspiring entrepreneurs. And by that, I really mean really aspiring to change the world. What can you sort of convey are the additional skills or knowledge that you think they should really focus on cultivating? Students spend a lot of time, if they're graduate students, on their research in their areas of major, if they're undergraduates. But of course, there's a lot more that comes together in really changing the world. What are your thoughts on that you could sort of convey to these students?
So I'll start with the undergrads and then move to the grads. So undergraduates, it's important to be exposed to entrepreneurship and to understand what it's all about, but it's extremely rare that undergraduates actually found companies that have sufficient technology differentiation to be, among the tech giants in the world. And so I think it's exciting for undergraduates to think about design thinking, to think about entrepreneurship, to get exposed to what it means to start a company, maybe to work in a startup. But I would not suggest that as a career path while you're still an undergraduate, because I think you can significantly benefit from getting exposed to it as an undergraduate, going out and working in somebody else's company, whether it's a large company or a small company, because that experience matters. If you look at who VCs invest in, they invest in people that have actually done companies before, even if they failed, because experience matters. And I think that undergraduates often lack the experience that they need to build a successful company. Now, you can learn on the job, and some people do, some undergraduates do found successful companies, but it's rare. And so to just be aware of that, I think is important. For the graduate students, they actually have the knowledge, graduate students and postdocs and faculty have the knowledge to take technology or take their research ideas and build differentiated technology around it. And if you look at the most successful companies, they are built by people either who have technical background and went on to leadership roles in other companies before they started their company, or they're graduate students and postdocs and faculty. So for the graduate students and postdocs and faculty, I encourage you to think about whether you want to be an entrepreneur, whether you want to start a company. Read the first chapter of that book. Do you want to be a founder? Often the answer is no. And this is not something that you can put off. Like, you can't say, well, I'm about to have my first child, so maybe I'll found the company in a few years. Startups are something that, the opportunity comes along, timing matters. But if you really think that you might want to start a company, come talk to any of us at Princeton that have done it, because it's a wild ride, but it's a very exciting one. And I would not have traded my 2 experiences founding companies for anything. They were wonderful, rewarding experiences in their own right. And they also made me a much better academic.
Fantastic. There's another really interesting question here, and I think it once again sort of connects with the constituents, the people who you're speaking to. And this is the question. It's Dean Goldsmith. What is the single greatest barrier or bottleneck to the next Quantena being funded and founded and ultimately successful here at Princeton, in particular, instead of at Stanford?
Yeah, Quantena was a chip company, and chip companies need a lot of money. It's kind of interesting that Silicon Valley now has very few silicon companies, especially startups, because it's so hard to do. So I'm going to take the question a little bit broader, not so much just about Quantena, but about startups. Why should somebody who's entrepreneurial minded come to Princeton to study here? Why should they found a company here as opposed to Silicon Valley? And the reason I'm excited about being a dean here is I do think that Princeton has many attributes that would make it a better place to found a company than Silicon Valley. One of those is cost of living. I mean, houses in Silicon Valley, even under the pandemic, are crazy expensive. And, we're realizing with the pandemic, a lot of people are moving out of Silicon Valley because, why pay millions and millions of dollars for a place to live where you can pay, a fraction of that for a much nicer house somewhere else. When I think about Princeton, to me, it looks a lot like Stanford looked in the 1950s when Terman, who really Silicon Valley is because of Fred Terman, he saw the importance of taking research ideas out of the university and into industry. He encouraged Hewlett and Packard to found that company. We haven't done that at Princeton so much. We haven't really encouraged our constituents to take their ideas out of Princeton. We've been kind of the quintessential ivory tower. That's changed. That, I wouldn't have come here if I thought I had to change that culture to be successful, because changing culture is hard. It's been embraced by the leadership of Princeton, by the faculty at Princeton. So the will is here. There's cheap land. There's a pull from New York and Philly for technology that's building. There's New York City is the next tech hub. There's a huge demand for engineers and technology. So, and there's capital everywhere. That people respect Princeton. It's a brand name. It's a great university. So I think what we need is to accelerate the efforts that we're doing within the Keller Center, within Rod Priestley's Office for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and within the School of Engineering, to just provide the foundation, the platforms, the mentors and supporters to encourage people to think about being entrepreneurs. And again, it's not for everyone. So, if 10% of the people that are thinking about doing a startup actually do it, that's probably about the right number. But I think that Princeton and the central New Jersey area have all the ingredients to be the next high-tech hub. And that was in my slides, in fact.
So actually, you touched on 2 points that are on the minds of our audience. One of them has to do with the pandemic, and the other one has to do with lessons learned from a place like Stanford, where ultimately they went through this journey of connecting academic research and real-world innovation. So maybe the first question here is, we definitely want to create Princeton in our own image, because you've kind of outlined the really unique opportunities that there are when we do that. What are some of the lessons that we can learn from some of the other places to sort of really head down successfully and in earnest that path?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I touched on one thing, which is that Silicon Valley is not a great place for diverse engineers. That's obvious. There's been lots of articles written about it. And I think that means that technology created there cannot achieve its full potential, because you don't have diverse people sitting around the table thinking about how do we develop technology to solve particular problems. They're not thinking about what the problems are. And then they're also not thinking about the unintended consequences of technology, like bias in artificial intelligence, or using a social media platform to influence an election. I think that, so that's one big lesson, is that if we're going to create innovation and ecosystem in our own image, we can have an unfair advantage in that we are a very strong liberal arts university with a very strong set of values geared towards benefiting humanity. And that is the tech hub I would like to create. Nobody else has a tech hub like that. When you think about Israel or Shanghai or Boston or the Bay Area, that isn't their goal. And again, that doesn't mean you don't make money in doing that, because that is the currency of a successful startup. But the technology that you're creating is to benefit people. And I think that that's one lesson that we can take from these other successful tech hubs and do a little bit differently. I think the other thing that is, I don't know if I'd say a lesson learned, but when you look at the other tech hubs, particularly in the United States, like Boston and the Bay Area, the cost of living is so high that it really has a huge, they pushed out anybody who isn't an engineer. And again, that makes it difficult to have the whole ecosystem that's part of a company. So I think that that's an opportunity that we have. I don't know how we would prevent, if we were successful, the cost of living going up, but there's a lot of land around New Jersey. And then the other thing that's interesting is Silicon Valley never leveraged its proximity to San Francisco. They might as well be, at opposite ends of the state. Silicon Valley was developed to create technology that was, just for technology's sake. We are between two big cities that have huge needs on the technology side, particularly around the areas of biotechnology and also data science. So we can learn from the places that did not leverage their proximity to big cities, because right now big cities are crying out for technology, also smart cities and robotics and automation. So I think that we can leverage our location better than Stanford did with respect to surrounding cities.
So actually, related to the matter of being in proximity to cities, and also people being in proximity to each other, especially trying to bring the most diverse perspectives possible. The sort of other question that was embedded in there has to do with the pandemic. What are your thoughts on how that might pose challenges, or it might pose opportunities, especially given the stage that we're at here in Princeton in our sort of innovation journey?
Yeah, I get asked that more broadly, in that, well, what's it like to start as a new dean in a new university across the country in the midst of a pandemic? And I think, because I'm an optimist, I always think about, well, what's the upside, right? So the pandemic has changed many things, but it's not clear how permanent those changes are. So obviously we're all remote. I wish we were having this meeting on the Princeton campus where you can meet people and start up conversations in a very natural way. A lot of innovation and collaboration happens through those impromptu dialogues. You're sitting at a cafe and, you see someone, you go talk to them and you end up talking to the person that they're meeting with, and that's your next company. So not having those kinds of impromptu conversations also, in terms of meeting up with potential investors or just meeting up with sponsors and mentors, it's much more natural to do that in person. On the other hand, what has happened with all of us going remote is we can reach a lot more people. Like this conference, if we were having it at Princeton, there'd probably be a lot fewer people that would be able to attend, both as attendees as well as, keynote speakers and people participating in the various panels and talks. So that's one benefit. The other benefit is we've learned that we can work remotely. There's a price, which is that we're missing out on the innovation and collaboration that happens when we're in person. And I don't think that we're going to go to fully remote work, certainly not fully remote education, when we get beyond the pandemic. But we have learned that we don't need to travel quite as much as we used to, and we don't need to all be in one place quite as much as we used to. And I don't know how that's going to impact innovation broadly, but it certainly makes place, like, people think about Silicon Valley as a place to do innovation. I think that's going to get a lot more dissipated. And that's an opportunity for us as well, that, if people stop thinking about, well, if I want to be an innovator, I go to Boston or I go to the Bay Area. Now people are going to say, well, I can innovate from my apartment or my home in the Rocky Mountains. Now we as Princeton, given that we're launching this in the midst of the pandemic where we can learn from these new trends, can say, well, how do we bring together innovators that are all around the country or all around the world to further our innovation mission? So I think those are some of the lessons from the pandemic that we can take away, but there's many more to be learned, I'm sure. We're still in the middle of this and don't know everything that's going to emerge when we come out of it.
Now, you mentioned kind of in passing and answering that question about mentors. And I wanted to just sort of touch on that. There's a very important question, I think, from an audience member here about how do you select your mentors? These are not necessarily people who just understand your experience as an engineer. These are not necessarily people who just have business background, which you might be missing. You talked about the importance of leadership and how those kinds of attributes are really what define the kind of experience and ultimately success you can have in innovation. So imagine, you're a Princeton PhD. What are the ways in which, what are the, sort of factors that come to your mind in selecting those really critical mentors? And I think that this is kind of a broader question as well about how do we bootstrap that, sort of process of thinking about real world innovation and entrepreneurship.
Sure, and I think that's a critical question. I'm asked a lot about how do we bootstrap innovation and entrepreneurship at Princeton? How do we get people thinking about it? And people talk about the Bay Area as having, there's something in the water, or there's some magical pixie dust that make people think about entrepreneurship. It really is the people, the fact that there are so many people around you that have done it, that, that makes the idea pop into your mind, and you don't think that's crazy, right? Because you see people around you that have done it. And you can also kind of walk down the hall or invite someone to coffee, and it's easy to do because, again, this proximity matters in that respect. So I found for my own mentors, I had mentors in the university who were also entrepreneurs. That makes a big difference, especially if your heart is in academia. I had no intention of ever leaving academia when I did my startups. And there were people around me that had done that. So I could go and say, well, should I start this company? What do you think? I was introduced to my co-founder by a colleague, John Chiaffi, who was approached by him to meet me. So the thing is that only about 10% of the faculty at Stanford in electrical engineering and computer science have founded companies. So it's not that there's everybody around you has done it, but there are some, and you know who they are, because often those companies are big companies. Since I've been at Princeton, or started talking to faculty and other stakeholders over the summer, there's about 10% of the faculty at Princeton and Princeton Engineering that have founded companies. So there are mentors and sponsors around. They're just not as visible. And I think that one of the things that we need to do is to make them more visible. And by the way, it's not just the Princeton faculty. We have unbelievably loyal and devoted alums who are incredibly successful in business and want to help, and they want to foster this entrepreneurship and innovation. They think it's important for Princeton to have impact. So we need to convene the resources for our students, our undergraduate and our graduate students, so that they can have the same kinds of interactions as if they were at a Stanford or an MIT. I don't think that's hard to do because I know the people are around, and we just have to figure out how to convene them and how to connect them. And that gets back to another thing that I'll say about mentors, which is that it's a relationship. So it's not that, there's some formula. It's kind of like meeting your spouse, right? It's not like there's some formula where you say you're going to connect two people and sparks are going to fly. There has to be a synergy. There has to be a connection between them that's natural. And that's, how do we figure out how to do that is something that we have to invest time and energy into. But it happens, and it's just as rewarding for the mentor, if not more so, to see these people that they're helping to bring up as it is for the mentee. So it's a two-way relationship where both sides benefit. And I think that's just something we have the resources. We have new technologies that we've been using during the pandemic to connect people that we may want to try to experiment with. But I'm very confident that we can find a platform to connect people that are thinking about entrepreneurship with people that have done it so that they can really benefit from those connections.
I just want to follow this line of thinking about putting kind of your support structure together for, really pursuing an aspiration that you have. And of course, part of that support structure is those mentors. But of course, the other part of that support structure is your co-founders. And at a place like Princeton and a university, there's so many opportunities for different kinds of co-founders. It could be faculty connecting with faculty connecting with their postdocs, their graduate students, the external partners and ecosystem like you talked about in the tri-state area. What are your thoughts about, sort of co-founder relationships? What are the things that matter there? Of course, there's, technical synergies in terms of both the technology, but also the execution of a startup in other ways. But, what are sort of all of the, critical things that you would sort of elevate in people's minds as they're thinking, across all of these different people they could make these connections with?
Yeah, that's such an important question, and one that I did differently in my two companies. Your co-founder, founders are the soul of a company. It is so important if you are going to co-found a company with other people, who those people are. And it's not a given that you should do it with other people. The book I recommended, that's the second chapter, about co-founders. And it says, you could co-found a company with, friends and family, strangers, or people you've worked with before. And the best one to do it with is people you've worked with before. There's all kinds of problems of founding a company with friends and family. And strangers, it's interesting, that is the second best choice on average. The problem with founding a company with strangers is it's impossible to do due diligence on those people. That's one of the things that I learned in Silicon Valley, is that people I would go and ask about my potential co-founders, why would they tell me anything bad about those co-founders? Because it would get back to them eventually. So it's very difficult to figure out what's it like to work with this person. And they may look great on paper. Oh boy, they've co-founded, 3 companies and 2 went public. That doesn't mean that you're going to have a successful relationship. And so, one of the pieces of advice of someone that I knew said, well, when you're trying to do due diligence on your co-founders, you should only ask people that like you more than the other person, so that they'll tell you honestly, about that experience. And then, so first there's just the personality dynamics, and that's very hard to figure out because people are on their best behavior initially. The other thing is, what skill set should the co-founders bring? And that's something where you really want complementary skill sets. I founded a company with someone who was not an academic, who I didn't know, but had worked with people I knew, and who had founded a successful company that went public. He brought, different kinds of management and fundraising experience that I didn't have. And I knew that I needed that kind of talent in the company. I also am technical. I had no desire to be a CEO. So I think that that is the most important question to ask yourself after you ask yourself if you want to found a company is, do you want to do it with co-founders? And if so, how do you find the right co-founders? And there is no magic recipe. It could be as a professor, you do it with your students. It could be, multiple students get together and do it. But that's also challenging because they may have different goals. One may want to finish their PhD and go on to an academic job, and the other one wants to run the company. There's all kinds of tensions that can come up with any set of co-founders that you have. So it's a really important question to ask yourself.
This has been really fantastic. Now, there's a couple of questions that are a little bit more, personal questions, but I think they actually generalize really well. And so I'm going to go ahead and ask these. And the first one is, you talked a little bit about maybe struggle, but certainly just the, awareness that you're really kind of one of the few women in this ecosystem who's going forward and doing this. Can you talk a little bit more about, sort of what was that like? What were some of the mechanisms and strategies that really helped you overcome any challenges you faced and so on? So this is really in the context of women and other, sort of traditionally unrepresented or underrepresented folks starting innovation enterprises.
Yeah, so in some ways for the diverse engineers, they've already overcome the barriers of implicit bias and low expectations just to get their degrees. And that helps, because you're hardened somewhat, you're used to people doubting whether you're able to do this or not. So that was part of it, is I wasn't worried about people that didn't think I should be doing a startup. It also helped to have a very strong set of academic credentials to get in the door. Now that doesn't get you funding, it doesn't get you success, but it certainly gets people to at least listen to what you have to say. It helped to have a co-founder who had a lot of connections that I didn't have, and that got us both in the door. And the fact that the research that I had been doing was so critical to what it was we were trying to build. So I had a lot of credibility as a wireless expert. We were building wireless chips based on, ideas that I've been developing myself. So I think that one of the things that diverse engineers often struggle with is confidence that, you can do this because everybody around you, thinks you can't. You have to suspend that and just believe that you are bringing to the fact that you're diverse, that you have diverse ideas, that you've overcome so much adversity just to be a diverse engineer. Recognize that that's an incredibly valuable asset to have as you embark on doing a startup where you're going to encounter a lot of adversity as well. The only other thing I'll say is that you do have choices as an entrepreneur. You can choose who your investors are. You can choose who your co-founders are. You can choose who your employers are. Creating an environment where diversity is embraced, going with investors who respect diverse engineers. I never had any issues with my investors. I never felt for 1 second that they thought less of me because I was a female entrepreneur. We chose those investors, right? We had our first, if you look back at that ringing the bell picture where we had the founding engineers, 3 women were designing our chip, and so you have the option to create a company where diversity and inclusion is embraced by your investors, by your leaders, by your engineers. And I think that also helps.
Well, there's one last question, and I'm going to, in fact, give a little bit of an answer for it, but I'll let you sort of answer it quickly. We've got about a minute left. The question is, how, if I'm in the Princeton area, do I get involved in your vision of entrepreneurship? This particular person is asking as a possible angel investor. I think part of the answer here is check out this conference and make sure you make all the connections you can. If you have just another quick comment on that, Andrea, we'll end on that note.
Yeah, my answer is we need you. We want not just your investment, but your expertise. And we are in the, I got here in September, so I've been here just over 2 months. I am crafting a strategic vision collectively with Naveen and Rod Priestley about how do we tap the tremendous resources and people that want to be involved in this vision. So stay tuned. I don't have the answer now, but we do need you. And feel free to reach out to any of the three of us or all of us. I don't have the answer yet. Maybe Naveen has it, but we will have mechanisms and ways to get you engaged, and in the near future, because we want to put the pedal to the metal, as they say, although now we have gas cars or electric cars, so there's no pedal to the metal. But anyway, so that's my response. And Naveen, go ahead if you want to add to that.
Well, I'm just going to paraphrase it and saying, look, this is our thing to do together, not me and Dean Goldsmith and Rod Priestley, but all of us in this area. It's something that's going to really lift everyone around us up. And so I think that's really part of the spirit of this entire conference. And so what I want to do is just once again, thank you, Dr. Goldsmith, for your spirit, for your excitement and enthusiasm, and of course, for agreeing to do this to really kick off the Engage Innovation Conference. And with that, we're going to wrap up this particular session. Thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your questions and your attention. Thanks, Naveen, for moderating. Bye-bye.
Bye.